matter, and I have no idea what is it open on, so I'm gonna do it like this. Oh. What is it open on? Oh gosh. This episode is dedicated to Pluto as ruled by Saturn, and the reason we are having um, scientific revolutions and social changes as related to the notion of time or the core of time being composted. So this is a video I wanted to make long ago, and I hope my Twitter friends will forgive me. Um, there it is. As always, I begin with looking at the chart of the hour. So this is not pre-elected. Most of my episodes are just spontaneous. And so we have ascendant in 24 degrees Scorpio with Mars here in it's the 10th house, 7 degrees Leo, and the Sun in the 8th house. The moon in 22 degrees Scorpio, right on my Mars when I think about it, right on my natal Mars. And I see kind of approaching Saturn at 7 degrees Pisces, Venus applying to oppose Pluto, and so I feel my throat aching. Have natal Venus in Taurus and Venus applying to oppose Pluto. It's like I feel my throat aching, but I still desire to make a video, and surprisingly enough, or not surprisingly at all, this video is about Pluto. That and what does Pluto do in Saturn's sign? So, not surprisingly, this is a Venus day. It is still a Venus day here, and it is Saturn's hour. So, of course, this is a good time to talk about it, and perhaps a bit of a remedial video, because I've been feeling like, oh, my throat is aching, but at the same time, I do want to speak. And this is a video I wanted to do for a long time, and so this is my bit of Venus-Pluto remediation for this transit. And so I'm going to honor Pluto and honor what Pluto is doing in the fabric of time and what Pluto is doing in Saturn domain. So just a bit, and this is a timeless teaching, okay? We'll always be able to look at this episode and see how that affected the zeitgeist that we are now, but also for the next 20 years, as well as learn about the joint of Pluto and Saturn from a philosophical perspective about the nature of scientific revolutions, because these are times where we have scientific revolutions when Pluto is ingressing into Aquarius and making its passage, and also about the nature of Saturn itself, okay, the nature of time, nature of what we call karma, certain changes in religion, in belief that are related to science, of course, and of course political changes. And why does Saturn coincide with skin color based politics? Okay, whether it is slavery or abolishing slavery, or racism, or patriarchy, and all these things, or release from certain old lineages. So let's start with Pluto. Pluto, I call it the compost planet because it takes something that traditionally also Saturn does. It takes something that is set aside, decayed, dead, taboo, dormant, and revives it. It brings in a certain light into the shade, into the darkness. Now, the beginning of this process does not seem so rejuvenating, because it looks like, think about birth, okay, baby being born. The first couple of weeks, or I think the first couple of weeks at least, I don't know enough about this, um, then a baby is uh, being conceived, but we don't see any tummy yet. And so it takes a while for the growth to happen, and then we have a tummy, and then eventually we have a baby. When everything goes right, then this is what the process, the passage of time is. And so in the beginning, it is concealed. Their life is growing inside, but you don't see it. Okay, same is happening with planting a seed in the soil. It grows roots, but it grows the roots first and then only grows the trunk and the leaves. So it takes time. And during this time, it seems to us, if we capture, okay, if we take a graph and we capture the segment of the graph that is this passage where there is a baby but we don't see it yet, well, that would be the type of Pluto that we talk about when we talk about Pluto as hidden power, something that is hidden. And because Pluto takes 248 years to go from point zero to 360 degree, and I think S.J. Anderson, I think, was the first that I ran into mentioning the exact cycle of Pluto. So that's a lot. And so that fragment of time is being stretched out, and so we can tend to believe that what Pluto hides, it will never expose. Because for some people, it looks like there's a lifetime of something that was not exposed during the lifetime. Oh, it begins to rain. So I'll go inside. Um, Wanted to do an outside video, but it begins to rain again. So, and so when we think about Pluto as hiding something, this is the notion of that concealment or the phase where something is hidden. Okay? I know some people use certain charts to accumulate, let's say, hidden wealth, and they say, okay, maybe I can ask Pluto to do this, and it's not impossible that it will help you for a while and it can work, but you also must understand that the next phase of Pluto is the exposer, and Pluto is the great exposer. It tends to what is hidden. Pluto is compost. Pluto is basically what we throw out and piles up. Pluto is also therefore a part of recycling. Pluto is the depletion and rejuvenation. For example, if I put the picture of Pluto, and this is personal, it's not a prescription. Let's say I put the picture of Pluto on my cash. Okay, and I had put a picture of Pluto on the cash, and then I went and I invested this cash, and then I got the next cash that I got. I began to have it in different ways or in different coins, and so it was taking something and kind of taking the old and transforming it into something new, and then the new comes in a different way, already in more up to the times, okay, up to the time of what we do need. If I put Pluto, let's say, outside my doorway, okay, then I began to transform the yard suddenly to a place that I can sit, that I can lay down, to bring armchairs, and so on and so forth. Or I put Pluto next to a pile of documents, okay? Then suddenly I begin to make order in these documents because Pluto is taking something and transforming it into something new. And this is what it does. And so I would not advise you to rely on something remaining secret with Pluto, okay? And this sort of death and rebirth cycle is what we know most as this planet. It's associated also with nuclear energy and the core of something, okay? Transforming something from the core. So this is what Pluto brings to the table. Now let's take a look at what Saturn brings to the table. And Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius, um, in a slightly different fashion. What Saturn brings is the notion of time itself. But you say every planet brings the notion of time itself. Yes, but because traditionally Saturn was the most far away or the slowest moving planet before we reintroduced the outer planets and the asteroids, then we understand that Saturn takes 28 years to revolve around the zodiac. It's not anywhere near as Pluto, but more mundanely, it's the lineages of time, the faculties of thought, the teachings that we have here on Earth. So think about a school of thought where you have the teacher and the students, this great lineage of thinking that is ruled by Saturn. Yeah, Jupiter is philosophy, but Saturn is the philosophy of the generations. It's the intergenerational aspect of things. And so Saturn also rules things that have a telos. So, for example, agriculture. Okay, you plant a seed. If you plant strawberries, you're probably not going to grow oranges. And therefore, Saturn also rules a certain notion of karma, of time. Okay, simply put, if you plant the seeds of oranges, don't expect to grow apples. Okay, plant the seeds of the things that you want to grow. That's the logic of Saturn. If you and therefore it's also the tiny steps that amount to mountains. Because in 28 years, if you make a tiny step today and you make it every day, then you can build a mountain. By the time you're 28 or 28 years from now, you can build a mountain because your efforts. Okay, if you write one page every day, then think of how many pages you have written by the time you're 28. This is Saturn. Um, and of course, karma has a lot of effect in our lives for how do we see karma, how do we see implications, how do we connect? Because if you planted, let's say, carob tree, okay, it takes 70 years to yield the first fruit. Okay? But the thing is, you planted this tree, you know it's carob tree, you maybe tell it to your next generation, this is carob tree, and by the time it yields fruits, it's obvious that the carob fruit comes from the seed of the carob tree. It is obvious that somebody must have consciously or unconsciously spread that seed into the soil, and that grew up to be a flourishing tree. Okay? It is less obvious in a complex system. One of the stories that I love to tell about Saturn Venus, I have Saturn opposing Venus myself, and another person with the Saturn Venus hard aspect is Ksenia Moore. And Ksenia Moore studied past lives. It was considered that Saturn delays at times relationships, Venus, because of something bad you did in past life. Or there was something that you did in past life, and therefore relationships do not come easy to you now. And as Ksenia Moore studied past life and she went for readings, then she discovered that actually in many cases, let's say you are a woman and you have Saturn Venus hard aspect, it can be the case that you were a victim to abuse in past life. And therefore, relationships in this life are delayed until you are able to find yourself and to love yourself and to set healthy boundaries so that you can be a healthy part of a healthy relationship. So Saturn keeps those abusive men from reaching you, or from getting too deep into you, or from having too deep of an effect on your life. It takes them away. Okay. um, and I cannot expose the entirety of my life story, but a part for me was that, I grew up with one of my parents and not the other, and eventually it was probably good for all sides. Okay, there's with zero blame. It was just the understanding that it takes time for certain things. Okay, it takes time for certain things. So there are, many things to do with that. And so Saturn, because it governs time, it governs the thing that change with time. And so if in one point we see karma in a certain way, in another point we see karma in a different way. Pluto in Saturn's sign is basically rejuvenating the way we see lineages, or it rejuvenates the lineages themselves, the schools of thought themselves, and it takes the fabric of time, rejuvenates that, and creates a new fabric of time. Simply put, the astrologers, the physicists that explored light, okay, and the working of light, one famous physicist who broke down a lot of the components of light into diagrams of how light can operate, was Richard Feynman. And he had ascendant Virgo, but he had Aquarius in the sixth house, and Sun, and the Sun in Taurus in the ninth, and a 12th house Leo. Okay, so he had these opposites, polar opposites, in his work, where he explored as a researcher the notion of time and the notion of probability. Because what is probability is basically predicting into the future something that you don't know for 100% that will be true. Okay, so this is playing with the probability, plays with the concept of time in a certain way where you can see certain things that can happen, but it's not like if to bring back to agriculture, if you plant this seed, it can be 50% oranges, 50%, let's say, grapefruits. And he said, but is this oranges or grapefruits? And Feynman would tell you, well, listen, I don't know. We will have to wait for the tree to grow. And probability says it's going to be 50% grapefruit, 50% oranges. And this is why people do not understand quantum mechanics or quantum thinking, because they're used to a notion of time. Like, you planted oranges, you grow oranges. What do you mean you planted something and you don't know if it's oranges or grape? What did you plant? Did you look? What did you plant? Yes, I looked very carefully what I planted. But this is the seed, this particular seed in time grows in such a way that it can be so, the probability of so and so for it to be that frequency, and then the probability of so and so for it to be that frequency, and then under certain conditions it's going to act like a particle, under certain condition like a wave. This was already known. And then what are the conditions? Well, there is a probability, we don't know for sure, and there are certain factors that affect this probability as well. So it's dynamic, it's non-linear. And so what is this but applying into light the notion of composting time? And Feynman had Pluto in Leo in the 12th house, okay, with Aquarius in the 6th house. And so you get that was a person who had the perception into a certain perception of time that is not the telos that we are. Some voices, some facets of antiquity and of modern times talk about as, if I planted strawberries, I'm not supposed to grow cucumbers from that seed. Okay, so Pluto in itself takes the notion of what's gonna happen and composts it and brings in something new. So you think about probability, and then it's historic. If you how what is the history version of probability? It is statistics, and those quasi mathematical models brought into science. And now there's literally no scientific research you can do without learning a bit about statistics, because if you're doing statistics, it's very likely that you're doing something that has the probability to predict probability. Okay, if you look into the past, and this is still very linear notion of time, if we look into the past, then we may be able to predict the future. Part of it is the concept of astrology. How do we predict cycles? We look at the cycles within cycles within cycles, and what did we have in past similar cycles? Yeah, that's pretty much the most that we can do. It's like what happened 248 years ago? Well, it was a cycle of the French Revolution and the American Revolution. Um, Okay, and what will be now? Probably some revolutions, but we're also within the cycle of going from the Dark Ages to the Golden Ages, and within those 300 years, it can be that this cycle is going to yield different results than we had before, simply because we are heading to the Golden Ages, and then we have two cycles to take into account. There's the cycle of Pluto and the cycle of the eras, which is now leading to the Aquarian age. Okay, and it doesn't mean that the Pluto cycle leads us to the Aquarian age. It's just the coinciding of the 300 years of passage from Piscean age to the Aquarian age that coincides with now Pluto ingressing into Aquarius to a cycle of 248 years until the next time it is in Aquarius. Okay, and so Pluto now becomes either by correlation or maybe some sort of causation that we're not aware of, but definitely not the causation of Pluto itself, because it takes more than 248 years for eras to change from sign to sign, ages to change from sign to sign. And that is the beginning of how come we see revolutions in science, in industry, industrialization, technology, and political upheaval during the times of Pluto in Saturn sign. What is time? Okay, a part of the notion of time has to do with what we expect to grow. For example, you bring a baby to the world, you have today a gender reveal, and after the gender reveal, even though we know we already have trans people, we already have queer people, then there is the expectation, okay, it has a penis, this is a boy, it has a vagina, this is a girl. Okay? That is one way where time itself reveals something that has to do with gender, with identity, with and in the past we would say, okay, it has a penis, so it will marry someone who has a vagina. Okay, if everything goes right, they will get married and then they will have more babies. It has a vagina, so she will marry somebody who has a penis, and then they will have children. And if everything goes well, and then she will move in with them, and she won't carry the family name of the family. So we also need to have somebody like a baby with a penis if we want our lineage to proceed. That was the fabric of time. Although family names are not always, if you think about times where society, let's say, lived perhaps more separately or more together, and I don't know all that much about the particular communities, but there are certain places where you did not have a family name. You didn't need a family name. Either the community was so small or people lived so separately that you didn't have a family name. And so perhaps the concern was, okay, people with babies with penises tend to grow, people that can chop woods more easily, and babies with vagina tend to grow, people that can make stews more tasty. Okay, maybe it was like that, maybe not at all. Okay, if you look at Nordic societies, I have a video, a series of shorts by two women that are Nordic. I think both Norwegian, and one of them lived outside of Norwegian, and they are both pregnant, so they are both pregnant now. During the pregnancy, one is pregnant with the boy, one with the girl, and there are different signs for the boys and the girls with the effects of the pregnancy. And during this time, they're both pregnant. During this time, two women pregnant, nobody else to help. They are building and redecorating the home to the children. And when I mean building and redecorating, I mean just that. Okay, they are building things, they are making construction work, they are designing the home while being pregnant with the nausea and everything. So, this is a particular fabric of time with particular people that you probably wouldn't see in other societies. Who would think that, in between nausea and nausea, you can redecorate your home and build your home to the baby, and like nobody helping you out but you and your spouse, which is also pregnant. Okay, those are the type of things that you get when different times meet. Pluto brings us the notion of time being composted, and so the times when you will have a gender reveal are no longer relevant, because you don't know what will be the gender of your baby, because you don't know. Okay, so they have a penis, so they had a vagina. Maybe it's different. You experience that the pregnancy is different, but you don't know what will they grow to be. Okay, and so this not knowing what will this thing grow to be is a facet of something messing with the lineage, something messing with the fabric of time. And when I say messing, I'm not saying that's a negative connotation. I'm just saying composting it. The expectation of what will one action lead to another, you don't know. Okay, and this is also accompanying financial changes. There are certain things that you look at and you say, okay, if I work, and a lot of millennials and Gen Zers complain that they say, I work so many jobs, and thank God I'm able to work for the people who are able to work, and I don't have savings, I don't have, I don't have the foreseeable retirement. The taxation is still wearing on me, even though I don't really have the income that can afford taxation. And they're just seeing this fabric of time kind of, okay, is there a financially responsible choice that I can make today with these circumstances? I already work, I can't, and the bills are so high that I cannot save. Okay, maybe I move to another country, maybe I move and buy land. Oh, but then the weather is crazy, or the government doesn't supply for water, or the government, like in Europe, tells you that you cannot grow things, foods, vegetables, you cannot grow on your land, even though you have land. So they kind of bully you out of your land. And so you ask yourself, okay, what is a good financial decision that I could make right now? And you don't know, because it's been decomposed. Everything to do with the fabric of time, and a part of our fabric of time is retirement. And so Saturn is also to do with debt and taxation. That is why we had the American Revolution and the French Revolution were all involved land and taxation on land. Okay, Pluto is now about to ingress back into Capricorn for its final show until the ingress for good into Aquarius. And Capricorn is land, is agriculture. It's land that you grow crops on, particularly. Okay, it's the type of land that you grow crops on. It's not only for leisure, but it's also working land. And basically, we're re entering this time where not only obtaining land or even housing is difficult, but also even if you have land, you can't grow things on your land and the weather is crazy. So with all the technology that we have, the weather is still kind of asking us, okay, what do we do when we can't rely on having a steady weather or when we can't rely on growing crops? What steps do we do right now? And on the other hand, we have a boost in technology. And the boost in technology basically is also a facet of rejuvenating the concept of time. Not only in the sense that you have AI taking the labor of blah, blah, blah. If you had, let's say, deep learning, machine learning, and you, sorry, bless me, and you activate this algorithm based on this learning machine, then it has a telos in itself that is both predictable but also unpredictable. We have patterns of emergence of the AI itself. Okay, now we have a machine that is learning. Now we have a new play with time that yields certain graphics, certain texts, certain deep fakes, certain reality. How? By playing, if I have a computer that can do only 1 plus 1, 2 plus 2, and can do only one computation at each time versus, let's say, quantum computer that can computate very complex thing in milliseconds or just like this. And so there are many things that I am doing with time that I wasn't able to do before. And also there are many things that I'm no longer able to do with time that I used to be able to do. Okay, I used to be able to say, okay, what will I have my children's children? Let's plant a forest. But now I don't know if the government will ruin this forest. What will be, if the weather will be crazy, will this forest grow? There's so many decisions based on time that I cannot take, and therefore taking responsibility in the Saturnian way is being diminished for the time being. We recently had Saturn in Aquarius squaring Uranus, kind of preparing us for the Pluto ingress. Because Saturn, like we said, is about maturation. It's about the decisions that you can foresee what will be the implications, so you need to make the right decision. Okay, if you want to grow food for your family, you need to think how many fruits and vegetables do I need? Which cattle do I need? How many of each? Okay, can I slaughter an animal? Who can slaughter an animal? Are we going to try and be vegan? And then what happens if that does not work out? How are we going to get animals? All these decisions that you have to make that are of Saturn nature, because they're gonna have implications, and you expect to be able to predict something long term. Okay, that's the intergenerational gap where some of our grandparents, being a millennial, or some of our parents, my grandparents from my mama's side, they used to work and eh, pretty much in the same workplace. And my grandpapa had a grocery store. My grandma was a chocolatier, and then she worked for a textile factory. It was the actual textile factory. It was Gotex, okay? So it was not Dimona, no. Um, and so they worked their entire lives, retire very late in their lives, and they had a mortgage for 30 years, which they could pay from my grandmother's work. And they got better conditions because it was like a contract of mass, production. Later, the second generation, my mother would say, well, at least my daughter will have a home. But then, no, we had to sell because some places were not safe to live in, and some places had no employment, and the places where you could work, you could not buy a house. And there was a time that I was living with my mama at my grandmama. So that was a part of the reality of there's the generational wealth kind of becomes different. Okay, because for example, my grandparents and my mama did not go or complete a university degree. I did. But I do not have a house. I'm almost 40. I do not have a house of my own because I don't know where it is safe for me to live and that I can afford a house. So that is something that that happens with the generation. And what Pluto does here is taking a certain generation, taking a certain fabric of time, taking certain predictions and composting them. And now, for the time being, you only have the in between. And that started in 2008, where we had a financial crisis and there was a lot of intergenerational gap because the older generation could not understand how, with so much technology and with so much abundance in the grocery store, you go up to the grocery store, you can find things from China, from Taiwan, from Netherlands, from US, from Britain, from Africa, from whatnot, from India. And that was unforeseen. So how come the younger generation doesn't just live in a way that their money is enough for their housing and so on and so forth, but unfortunately the life circumstances are not the same, but also fortunately, because who would hear of changing a job? There were days where if your father was a shoemaker, then you would grow to be a shoemaker, or you would be outcast from the family. You could not grow to be an artist. Pluto in Saturn sign, it makes the change. Things that you could no longer, that you could never do, now you can do, and things that you used to be able to do, now you cannot do. And if this is true with time, basically decisions that you could make based on the notions of the time, now you cannot make the same decisions, but there are other decisions that you can make. Today, you can, in many countries, marry a woman marrying a woman, a man marrying a man. In many countries, it's possible. I was today at the restaurant, and the waitress had this the Pride Month, so she had a frog, a frog pin, and then next to it she had a pin of the Bipan Poli flag, and she asked for. When I said it's really nice to see someone with with this pin with this flag now, especially in this Orthodox village that is not, taken for granted. And she asked for how to turn to me, like to a man, a woman, and so on and so forth. And that was very pleasant. That was not something that could happen in the generation of my grandparents or the generation even of my parents. Even my father is Dutch, and my mama tells me that when she went with my father to the Netherlands, she remembered until today how it was the first time in her life that she saw a man and a man kiss in Amsterdam. It's like, oh my God, there was a man and a man kissing. Okay? And today, even in the most Orthodox village, I can run into a person who will ask me, do I want to be addressed as a woman, as a man, mixed, or so on. So, isn't that lovely? Right? For me, it's lovely. I just had to say goodbye to a Facebook friend that said that is going to demonstrate against the Pride parade. So I say, okay, I don't mind that he is religious, but if he finds it so much so that he's going to demonstrate against a Pride parade, then I guess it's best for me to let go, so I will not be heartbroken in the future from this type of animosity. And This is also a part of changes to the fabric of time. Gay marriage, which is very much Saturn rules the ring, so marriage, marital contracts that are part of the state and are governed by the state is very much Saturn. Pluto throughout Capricorn was gay marriage, the birth of gay marriage in many states, not everybody. And so um, the ingress into Aquarius has to do more with the masses rather than the singular. Okay, with Pluto Capricorn, you asked who is on top, and then we had the lineages changing. We had a black president. We had in the United States. We had Forbes changing from only white people to Beyonce and Jay-Z, which literally Beyonce had a song that she mentions that's thinking about the grandchildren and how the lineage changes. She said, "My grandchildren are already rich." That's a lot of brown on your Forbes list. So that is what Pluto does in Capricorn. Okay, it changes, and what Saturn rules also the skin and the color of the skin. So from white to black. I recently saw a video about of a Nigerian man. I don't agree with every word that comes out of his mouth, but one thing he does have, he has certain educational shorts where he tells the true story of, let's say, a queen that was ruling in Africa. I don't remember which peoples of Africa, and she was running battles. So she was fighting herself and running battles, but he said she was also subjugating women, and she had a lover at every country that she conquered. But then the night after she would make love with him, she would slaughter him. Okay, and he said these are the stories, these are the true stories that we need to tell. And about the slavery, he says, well, there's still slavery going on today, and there was slavery going on of white people, black people enslaving white people. Now I know about it because I went to university, but most people, what they know and is that white people were the only peoples to enslave black people. And where he says, well, no, white people were not the only ones to enslave black people, but they were the only one to abolish slavery, which I'm not sure this is 100% the fact, but this is the kind of content that I run into when Pluto is making his way between Capricorn and Aquarius. Okay, kind of educating us about changes in the fabric of time, changes in the stories that we are being told. Also about society and also about people. And so, yes, technological advancement are made possible due to plays with time. Okay, suddenly there's a computer that can do many things in one time, and so time is reduced in a certain way that now you cannot compete with this computer in computation, and you cannot compete with this computer in certain types of creation. So now, what will you do for a living, right? So this is, on the one hand, great concern. On the other hand, the birth of the industrial age was also, for some people, the birth of leisure time and the birth of the state um, providing education so that people can read the manual. Okay, school was created in order for children and young workers to be able to read the manuals at work and to be able to work properly. Okay, nobody cares about the education of your children. They were considered workforce. So as people complained about the industrial age, then we had leisure, the rise in leisure time, and suddenly you had days off, and suddenly the government was expected to support certain things, and then people also began to raid, people also began to unionize, and there was a lot of violence surrounding it. Okay, it's not just that some people were slaves in the system, they were not being paid. It's just that all people were considered slaves unless they owned the company. Pluto comes to Saturn and changes the fabrics of time. So it changes the structures, it decomposes the structures, it changes the content of it changes who do we see in Forbes, but then it goes into changing the entire composure of it. Um, if I'm not mistaken, JP Morgan himself had Pluto in Aquarius. If I'm not mistaken, I did an episode about JP Morgan. And at that time, the concept of if you have a dollar and you put it in a certain company and it grows interest, then now you have more than dollars. You have, let's say, $3, and then you put them $3, you diversify them, then you have $17, and then sometimes you have $5, and then sometimes you have $25,000. And so at its time, what JP Morgan did was basically changing who are the people that can get wealthy, which would later lead us to the 29 crisis, where we had a bubble of stocks, because this was a new animal, and so it seemed like it's going to go on forever, but it was consisting of a bubble. Think about real estate today. There were many house flippers, because eventually, if you don't have money to buy a house, and the reason you're living in rent is because you can't afford housing, or because it's not safe for you to live in certain regions, then this is a bubble. Okay, it's a bubble, and it is, and it bursts so much. So I know a person, a colleague actually, who had his colleague in astrology, but he had a couple of estates, maybe 12 estates in the United States for years. And then came the house flippers, and he got scammed, and he had to get rid of all of his assets. Okay, so this is a Pluto in Leo person. It's not even a millennial or a Gen Zer. It's a Pluto in Leo person that, with the generation, the wealth deteriorated simply because he got scammed. As the generations transformed, the bubble of housing grew, because if in the past it was like, okay, the people who can't afford housing go to, let's say, Section 8, or there's certain people who tend to rent long term for their own varied reasons. But if it stays on, you are renting not because you are waiting for your house to be built, which is a healthy reason to rent, or you are renting because there is an option to buy this house, but right now you are renting because you just want to get to know the area, which is another healthy option. You just want to get to know the place, so you are renting, and then there is an option for you to buy the particular property. There's another healthy reason to rent. But then if you are renting just because you don't know where can if you can buy a house at all, and if you can buy a house, if it is in an area that is safe for you to live, or maybe you will die there or something terrible will happen there, then it's not healthy reasons. And so those things create bubbles. Okay, but if we go to the back to the time, go back in time to, let's say, the days where JP Morgan was founded, then you had a possibility, if you were a worker at the factory and you made $1, and you say, you know what, I'm gonna take this dollar and I'm gonna put today's dollar. Okay, I still have food from yesterday. I'm going to put today's dollar, I'm going to put it in investment, and then it's going to give me $3. And then I'm going to do more things with this money, and then I'm going to grow wealth while I'm continuing to work it. And so I can retire, not only with the income I made as an employee, but also with what I made in investment. And this allowed a lot of people that couldn't be rich to be rich. Okay, now we are having this type of composition again. Okay, there are going to be new ways to make money that weren't there previously, but then we need to be cautious, because some of them will lead to bubbles. And so when a person, if you're only working and all you make is this $1, and this is what you made for the day, and you have to buy food with this, you have to pay for your housing with this, and you have left like maybe 10 cents, and some JP tells you, you know what, bring me these 10 cents, I'll make you 20 with them. And it does make you not 20, it make you 30. And you say, you know what, here, take $5. Say, where'd you get $5? Say, I put cent to cent to cent. Say, okay, don't give me the whole $5. Give me $2.50. Keep your $5. Give me $2.50. We're gonna play with them some more. Maybe they'll be $10. Maybe they'll be $1. Okay, we don't know. It's new, but this is all you can do. Okay, think about later in 29. That would be the New Deal, um, where I don't remember the name of the president. I think it was Roosevelt, who said, well, I need your patience. I need you to be agreeing to experiment with me. Not that anybody had a choice, okay? He was elected. But he said, I need you to agree with me that we're going to try this new thing, that we're going to bring money to the markets, and for you to make purchases with this money. And so we get the engine running and we can get out of this. And eventually, two world wars and Manhattan Project ahead, and they got out of this, so we never know what contributed to what. Plus they were destroying crops at the 29, where people were hungry. They were destroying crops because they're trying to reignite this engine of this entity called an economy. Okay, and you could say that this is a result of that innovation that was actually good for humanity at the time of the JP Morgans of investments, of give me your 10 cents, let's make 20 out of them, and maybe that'll be 20 grand, maybe that'll be nothing, we don't know, but we can try and play, and we can try and see how do we create new ways to get rich that weren't available for you before. So Pluto also does that. And that is, in essence, is decomposing time. It's transforming the core of time. Because if you knew that you're going to work, there's literally nothing you as a working class can do, but hope that you will somehow be able to pay mortgage and live a certain life, better, not good, I don't know, then this is what you can do in this life. The best decision you can make is to try and keep yourself healthy so you can work, so you can pay the bills, so you can maybe raise children, and if you're very lucky, give food to the street cats or have a doggy. So you live in the American dream. But Pluto comes by, and so you're no longer able to rely on having a day job, on having good conditions, or on being able to make it. And then what happens is you try to look for new ways, and you're more playful with your money because, hey, you don't have a choice. And now that play that's called investment has become not a play, but something you rely on for survival. And this is something that creates a bubble. Okay? So that's another thing that we see as we change the core of time. Now, when those political changes happen, when people are more willing to experiment both with war and with technology, then you can give funding or research funds to certain developments that you wouldn't conceive of investing in before. And I talked about in my previous videos, think about the challenges chaos theory faced versus the American dream of the wet dream of a scientist that the Manhattan Project scientists were tackling. Because in Manhattan Project, the government just took the people they heard a good word about, and back then you could imagine, you could do things, and then the government would take these people and kind of like recruit them. It's like, go ahead, be creative, do whatever you do, take whatever money you need, and do whatever you need with this money to bring us good results. Okay, and that was the work of Einstein, because he called, again, I don't remember who was it that he called on the other line, and he talked about, well, he said, well, the Germans are going to have this bomb, so we better be the first to have this bomb, and that's how Manhattan Project was created. And we know the results, right? But in the 60s and the 70s, chaos theory could not get this research funding because those were not the times, okay? Those were not the times where you could get crazy research funds. Those were not the times where you could risk your name as a scientist to sign an innovative project. And what we must take into consideration is when Pluto is Saturn ruled, because that back then it was between Mercury and the Sun, so Mercury, Moon, Sun. When Pluto is Saturn ruled, there are understandings that are fundamental concepts that we see as time is being transformed. So whether it's Einstein being approved or Einstein being revoked or relativity theory being approved or revoked, we don't really know what will be, but what was up until now no longer resides. It's no longer possible to view the fabric of time in the same way that we did. Saturn now in Pisces means more fluidity, but this is only 3 years. Then we'll have Saturn in a fire sign, then we'll have Saturn in Taurus, in Gemini, and so on and so forth. So Pluto will take 20 years in Aquarius, and then Saturn, every 3 years or so, it changes sign. So we're going to have probably up to Scorpio. Okay, Saturn in Pisces, up to Saturn in Scorpio, at least, of Pluto being in Aquarius. Because it takes 28 years, or maybe Libra, okay, perhaps not Scorpio, maybe Libra, because it takes 28 years, so at least 20 years of Saturn changing signs and gives us types of flavor to the concept of time. Basically, Saturn in a given domain is a flavor to the concept of time. Saturn, Pisces, time is fluid, non-duality facets of time, discerning things that we weren't able to discern before, is the other polarity, Virgo, and not being able to discern things that we thought were discernible. Okay, so certain things that we thought had polarity now have union within them, and certain things we may have rediscover certain polarities that we were not sensitive to before. Okay, it's the Saturn of the oceans. Then we're going to have Saturn in Aries, which is Mars ruled, and it's ruling. And then the consciousness can play a time. Consciousness can play a time. Okay, so there's conscious time, unconscious time. Can you control time with your mind? Okay, those questions that we're going to ask ourselves. Can AI control themselves with the time with the mind? And what is the implication for that? Then we're going to have Saturn in Venus sign, where perhaps shifting objects in time. Okay, so it can literally be a time travel to another land, or a time travel to enjoy certain pleasures that exist in other places or other times. So what's another thing that's important about this play with time is that it is not, by its merit of being non-linear. If you think about the revival of, even in astrology, Hellenistic astrology, okay, or Renaissance astrology, and when it became popular, when it became very, it's like even in the recent years when I think about this, so Pluto and Saturn. The place of Pluto and Saturn here, even though traditional astrology sometimes does not even deal with the outer planet, okay, and I mean sometimes because I mean how it is practiced today. I don't mean what they did. Of course, they didn't have Pluto, but it's kind of bringing in those things that were of eras and generation. You have people doing other types of astrology, like Gracia Tasio, that's doing Babylonian astrology. Okay, so you have Hellenistic astrology, Babylonian astrology, or Renaissance astrology, and there's practiced by people like Christopher Warnock or Michael A. Bryan. And those things that belong to other time kind of take place in our times. So you bring in things both from the past and supposedly from the future. Okay, or the notion that we are heading towards the golden ages. So we are bringing in the golden ages. And so what can we expect? Is it going to be another revolution? Or is this something that might not necessarily lead to eventually Hitler and racism and ableism? that we had with the root being planted, where yes, we got released from taxation, but only the people who had land were free, which is nothing unusual. That was the Middle Ages too. It's just we composted who has land. Before, some other people had land. Now some other people had land, and then it took time to begin to attempt to abolish slavery. And then, as we are approaching Pluto and Aquarius again, we can remind ourselves that the difference between what went on in Germany in the 30s and 40s and in the United States was the Germany documented everything, and there were not necessarily other differences. Okay, maybe different races were destroyed, but eventually, yeah. And another things we document at these times was that yes, colonialists were horrid, but also the people that they were colonializing, they were quite violent too. And enough is to hear about some veterans who were taking place also in the war with Japan, okay, describing the enemy as being this fierce, vicious, suicidal, the kamikaze, and it's like, what can you do about this but drop two A bombs? But then the atomic veterans that had to withstand it had 50 years not being able to talk to one another about what happened, let alone heal. Um, so it's like, are we going into this type of cycle, or maybe because we are going into or within the 300 years of the golden ages, we're actually starting a cycle that, however unstable it is going to usher us into better times genuinely. But maybe this is also what the people thought during before the First World War, when they predicted that to be the war that will end all wars. And we're kind of heading into Neptune, going into Aries, ideation and evaluation of Martian things. For example, one big war, because Aries is about unity. Okay, so one. So the world is one entity, and there is world war, basically. Um, so that's the beginning of the notion of Pluto as composting time, and because it is composting time, then we have these scientific revolutions, these social revolutions, these political changes, these lineage changes, these hierarchical changes on who is at the top, but also structural changes, the chance for certain people to be wealthy where they weren't before, and the loss or deprivation from wealth of other lineages, and other people who previously were wealthy, and the entire thing kind of being like a death and rebirth of society as a whole. Okay. Then, of course, there is the notion of other societies of space, um, which is also consisting of various voices, as the voices who say, well, we can conceptualize using our psychic senses, and there are voices that say, no, we need technology, and so on and so forth. It's also a spiritual revolution. Okay, it's not just a material revolution or a scientific revolution, it's also a spiritual revolution. So we're also very much expected to have various thinkers, various religions, um, various ideologies that are going to be rising, some of which can be quite radical or quite impractical, but unfortunately implemented. And some of those can actually bring a rejuvenation or revival, maybe of certain concepts or certain facets of thought. Think about how many people were indulging in the concept of decalcifying our pineal gland during Pluto and Capricorn. Okay, and going back to Egyptian times, the revival of magic and more awareness to astrological magic. Okay, 2007, nobody knew in the community what it is. Today, I don't think you can have an astrologer that doesn't have some sort of talisman that they bought somewhere, even if it's only a buttercream or whatnot. Um, so that's uh, oh, and now we've turned into Jupiter time. So it's going to be with the ascendant in Sagittarius. So this is going to be quite an okay time. I know Venus is in the eighth house, so occult. Immediately I start talking about occult, of course. Um, and this will be a good time to broadcast this episode. So this is just the basics of it. I can't really go deeply, like in depth, because I have a bit of a sore throat and I'm tired. So I hope you can begin to play with this concept as Pluto in Saturn, as Pluto composting the core of time, what it means for science, what it means for society, what it means for the way we see history and teach history as well. And that is from me today, it's Shirley with Spirit of Matter. I hope to see you in my next episode. Bye bye. You can subscribe, of course, and all that.